our special thoughts going out to our colleagues in Anchorage and Mexico and any of the other areas that were impacted by the earthquake on Friday. Thanks for joining us today for webinar number 5 in our series, The Other Side of the Report Card, Supporting Social and Emotional Learning in Your Classroom, School, and District, with Dr. Maurice Elias and a number of his colleagues who you met in the last 2 webinars. Before we introduce Maurice, we'll let you know that Diana Kirka, the instructor for our credit course built around the webinars, will come on at the end of Maurice's presentation. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Welcome, Maurice. Are you in New Jersey today?
I am in New Jersey.
All right.
Where it's fortunately not too inclement, so I'm glad for that. And of course, our thoughts are with folks who were affected by the earthquake. It sounds like, even though it was very severe, it could have been a whole lot worse. So we're grateful for that. And
Sure,
so I think we'll begin.
Good.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So tonight our focus for the 5th meeting is on youth engagement and empowerment applications in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And I get reminded on occasion that sometimes this language of Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 is idiosyncratic to certain groups. So basically, we mean universal applications that would go to all kids. Tier 2 would be applications that would go to kids who are at risk. And Tier 3 would be applications for kids who are clearly experiencing some kinds of problems or difficulties. And the focus in the way we want to do this is to talk a little bit about a couple of things. We're going to talk about bullying as an essential sort of focus for youth empowerment. We're going to talk a little bit about service learning. And then we're going to talk about some other specific kinds of youth engagement interventions. And I think now what we're seeing everywhere, really, in the literature is the importance of youth involvement, youth engagement, youth voice in kids' academic success, in their social and emotional well-being, in their engagement and connection to school. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, honestly, none of us would like to go, although some of us may, but none of us likes to go to a job where we feel all we're doing is punching the clock, where we're feeling that all we do is just go through the motions, and where maybe our output is of interest, but we are not of interest. And there's growing evidence that that's the experience of too many kids today. So we want to talk about how social and emotional learning provides us with a way to think about it differently. And I start off with 2 quotes from Sargent Shriver. Some of you may remember Sargent Shriver. I'm curious if anybody has an association with Shriver. Of course, he was the founder of the Peace Corps, but he was the founder of many other things beside the Peace Corps. Shriver founded Head Start. He was instrumental in getting us Head Start. Shriver, of course, was tremendously involved with Special Olympics. And I think Special Olympics is probably the archetypal example of the importance of youth voice and human dignity. Sergeant Eunice Shriver believed very strongly that just because people had mental deficiencies, as they were called then, intellectual deficiencies and other related quote-unquote handicapping conditions, that we should not focus on those conditions, but focus on their essential humanity and find ways of nurturing and encouraging. So that's why I selected these 2 quotes from Shriver. One, we are going to ask our children not to just talk, but to act, serve, and live in accordance with a set of higher values and with a buoyant optimism. And how much would we all like to see buoyant optimism being the predominant emotion in our schools? And the second thing, when Shriver was just beginning to suffer from Alzheimer's later in life, he was asked what his legacy is. And his answer was this. He said, "My legacy? I'll tell you my legacy. When someone tells you that you can't do something, it's rubbish." And even before grit was invented by Angela Duckworth, Sergeant Shriver had and displayed a lot of grit. It is the case that the world was not clamoring for the Peace Corps. The world was not clamoring for Head Start. The world was not clamoring for Vista AmeriCorps, which we now know. No one was really saying legal services for the poor was a necessity. The Job Corps didn't exist. All of those things happened because Shriver felt they were important, and he wouldn't let anybody tell him that they couldn't happen. So I think the overriding message for our conversation today is that inspiration precedes remediation. And if we want to reach our kids, especially our kids in Tier 2 and Tier 3, we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to inspire them? What are we going to do that's going to reach past whatever disabilities or difficulties they have and find and nurture their essential strengths and their sense of hopefulness? This is one of the reasons why bullying is such a critical issue in our schools, because there's nothing that robs a sense of possibility as much as a feeling of unsafety. And of course, the more troubled, the more handicapped, the more disadvantaged kids are, the more easily they are able to be victimized. And so what we know from the research evidence, and this is from a landmark study in the Harvard Educational Review, that school climate affects student self-esteem, self-concept. It affects risk-based prevention efforts, that when we effectively focus on risk prevention and health promotion, we are simultaneously building a nurturing school climate. And that nurturing school climate is what achieves academic success for our kids. And that is the essence of what we have to understand about social and emotional learning, is that it's one thing to teach kids necessary and essential skills, but at the same time, they have to be in a comfortable, caring environment. And the number one element of that environment is that they have to feel safe. And so when we talk about creating student voice and empowerment, we first have to make sure that the climate that they're in is a safe one. So the skills that we're talking about are necessary in order for kids to participate in student life and in school life and in community life. So empowerment is critical, but empowerment without preparation is ultimately very disappointing. So we're not going to talk about all the specifics of SEL implementation. Those have been the topics of some of the prior workshops, but I wanted to make sure that we looked at these 5 skill domains and remembered that these are the ones that at the end of the day, kids need to have in order to take advantage of empowerment opportunities. If a kid's not able to manage their own emotions, giving them empowerment opportunities is not going to head them towards success. If they are not capable of empathy, if they're not capable of working with other people in positive and constructive ways, then when they have the opportunity, they will not take advantage of it. So this is really kind of in the background for our conversation. What we're talking about is how to shape and structure some of those opportunities. And again, the kind of climate we're looking for in the schools is one that has and articulates essential habits and values. The school has to set a moral compass, a moral direction for the kids so that they know toward what they should be applying their skills. And it also gives a direction for empowerment. It's part of that issue of inspiration. When our schools stand for something, that inspires our kids. And then what happens is transferred in the everyday life of the school and all aspects of the school community. So this is the background for specific things. And we ourselves have to be prepared to have conversations as adult staff members around this topic of what do we stand for, we as the adults. How we treat children in all aspects of our contact with them makes a very big difference. Our kids are looking at us. I'm going to talk a little bit later about school climate, but one of the questions that we ask in some of our New Jersey school climate surveys is we ask the kids, how much do your teachers like to be in school? And when the kids answer that question and the data get fed back to the teachers, sometimes the teachers are astonished because they think that somehow their dissatisfaction is being masked to the kids. But kids see everything. So we have to be very clear that the way we treat kids with respect, a sense of caring, safety, civility, encouragement of opportunity and resilience and challenge, that's why we are in the school, and we believe, truly believe, that these things are important for our kids. And we have to believe that all of our kids can succeed, not only the tier 1 kids, but the tier 2 and tier 3 kids. And that, as my dear colleague Larry Leverett, who's superintendent of an urban school district, always says, that we are ready to act on our beliefs with no alibis, no excuses, and no exceptions. Now, we ourselves have to be clear as adults about what we stand for. And this comes to a head with regard to bullying. Bullying is an adult level problem that, quite honestly, shouldn't be present in our schools. There is no reason for schools to accept any form of bullying behavior. It's not a developmental norm. Being a victim doesn't toughen up anybody. It's not a good thing to take your lumps from peers and asymmetrical relationships with you. And when we let the bully slide by, it only sets the stage for more serious problems later on. And we have seen this in the number of people who have been implicated in some of the worst shootings, who have had backgrounds related to bullying, intimidation, harassment of other people, that has gone unchallenged. It's a hard road. It's not a road that we've all taken, but we have to be prepared to do it. We have to make hard, prompt, relentless, and sustained professional decisions that will create healthy, productive, safe learning environment for everyone, regardless of ability or other personal characteristics. If we don't do that, then we are only giving lip service to empowerment and student voice. We have to create a climate where kids will not feel intimidated with regard to their participation. So this is a pretty widespread issue. 28% of students have been bullied physically, verbally, or online at least once in the past year. In New Jersey, we have what many people feel is one of, if not the most stringent anti-bullying laws. And the way in which bullying is defined in New Jersey is not only physical, but harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And the reason is because both harassment and intimidation are factors that impede student participation in student life, classroom discussions, and ultimately exercising their voice. The research basically shows that when kids are subjected to bullying, they suffer high levels of depression, internalizing problems, and compromised academic achievement. And I think we all know, maybe from your own experiences, if you recall this, bullying has a chilling effect on the people around the bully. So it's not only the victim that's affected. The number of kids in absolute terms affected by bullying is not that high. However, the impact is greater because kids see what's going on and they then start to go into a shell. And that's the exact opposite of exercising student voice. So we know that the kids who are both bullies and victims, i.e. kids who, when they are bullied themselves, turn to someone else and bully them, they have the worst outcomes of all. And as I just said, Salma Valley's research, among many others, talks about the fact that witnessing bullying leads to fearfulness and preoccupation, constriction of your actions, even constriction of your thinking, and reduced openness to the learning that your teachers are sharing with you. So it has very, very severe consequences. Bystanders who are victimized may not have the social supports they need after seeing a bullying incident. So when you think about it and you're asking a bystander to do something or expecting bystanders to do something, it's pretty unreasonable. As a strategy to expect isolated individuals to come forward, confront a bully, it's not something that we can reasonably expect. So this is why, as we will talk about, it is so important to establish the concept of being an upstander. Being an upstander becomes a norm for a school. Not only is it a norm, it's a norm based on standing up for the values of the school. So you see the connection between what I was talking about earlier, that a school needs to stand for something, and then at the same time, make sure that there's an expectation that you as a kid in the school can, are, and will stand up for what the school deems to be important. So let me show you a little bit of the data that we collect on hundreds and hundreds of schools in New Jersey. So here's a little data on the kids, the extent to which the kids like being in school. This is a very basic and important question to ask. This is from one of our urban schools, and we've given feedback to the staff from these data. If you take a look at these, the first chart, you notice that approximately 50% of the kids either agree or strongly agree that the school is a place they like to be. If I'm a school administrator, I'm not happy about that number. And I'm, that 33% that's in the middle, I don't sort of move those kids up, because this is a kind of a question where kids will tend to say better than they feel. So that's what I mean about how important it is to get these kinds of data and understand where the kids are at. To what extent do the kids feel like they're learning anything useful? Well, here's another important factor, because the kids are the receivers of instruction. What do they think of it? It's important to be able to ask kids this question and take their replies very, very seriously. Again, if you don't have kids who substantially disagree with this statement, that they feel that what they're learning is useful, can't be shocked when they're not putting their learning into practice. Here are more direct questions about bullying. So here's questions about the extent to which kids feel that bullying is going on in their school. And here again, what is a satisfactory number? I mean, again, the schools will differ, but these are important conversations that need to take place. And finally, another piece of data that I think you'll find interesting is we asked the kids the extent to which they are getting bullying prevention methods that work. I mean, we may be delivering various bullying prevention stuff, but the question is, do the kids feel it actually helps them? And that can be a very sobering question to ask. So now, let me show you how we have used the kind of data that has gotten generated from surveys like this. So we had a project, Developing Safe and Civil Schools, DSACS, where we collected data over 2 years, as you can see, from 115 schools, 48 districts, 48,000 students. New Jersey has a full range of different types of districts. We've got everything from seashores to rural to urban. We've got suburban, you name it, we've got that kind of district in New Jersey. We have every socioeconomic group, and we have elementary, middle, and high school. And across all those demographic categories, our data were very consistent. Number one, bullying is related to the climate of the school and is most strongly and significantly related to the respect that students feel in the school, especially among their peers. So if you have to think about the best anti-bullying program you could create, it would be to create a respectful school environment. So that's finding number one. Finding number two, the extent to which the kids feel there are learning strategies to cope with HIB, harassment, intimidation, bullying, was related to two things. The extent to which they perceive the teachers being caring and supportive to students and one another. So in other words, the teachers cannot model negative behavior and expect the kids to feel like they're in an environment that's teaching them something worthwhile about bullying. And the second thing is the extent to which the kids feel that they're involved in shaping their school environment in positive ways. I may be dating myself, but this is a sort of an interesting anecdote. I remember when I was in school, way back when, the teachers would go to the teacher's room. And the teacher's room in the old days was different than teachers' rooms now. And so we have vivid recollections of kids who, we have a health class. After the health class, the health teachers would go to the teacher's room. And pretty soon, we'd see white smoke coming out of the teacher's room. You could see it coming through the door, through the transom. So this led us to conclude that one of two things were happening. Number one, either in that teacher's room, they were having a papal convocation and were making some important decisions about papal selection, or else they were being hypocritical. And after teaching us about smoking, not to smoke, were engaged in smoking. And of course, that's the more powerful message. So in the same way here, if teachers think that they can teach anti-bullying strategies and admonish and advocate for anti-bullying strategies and then treat their peers in anything other than respectful ways, not going to work. And the last point here is that students appear to find HIB prevention messages valuable when the staff members are seen as genuinely caring and the students are engaged in the school. So you can see how the issues of bullying, in a way, force us to think about creating a climate that's going to be safe, in which kids can participate, i.e. they can be genuinely engaged in the school and also actively caring and supportive to one another. So we have to talk about that, right? So what are some of the small things that we can do every day in order to increase student voice? Here's something that we know from the responsive classroom. And many of you may be familiar with this practice, but I hope you'll see just how unbelievably important it is. Greet all students by name when they enter the school or classroom. Not just kids in elementary school, but middle school and high school. It's very important to give each child walking into the building a sense of ownership and dignity by calling them by their name. Related is to think about having a morning meeting structure. Morning meetings are important interventions that basically give kids a buffer of about 10 or 12 minutes, maybe every day, maybe a couple times a week, even once a week, but there's a regular period of time when the kids know they're going to have an opportunity to just talk about some of their feelings, talk about what happened in the world, in their community. I mean, just as an example, when the kids come back to Anchorage, they're not going to just sort of be ready to zip back into the school day. They would really benefit from having an opportunity to discuss their feelings, maybe their fears about potential earthquakes or things that could happen in the school. And if they have that 10 or 12-minute opportunity at the start of the day, talk about issues, those issues will then not interfere with their learning for the rest of the day. So we help our kids get engaged by giving them some opportunities to normatively discuss issues that may be strong emotional barriers for them. Similarly, we can begin or end classes with brief periods of reflection on what kids have learned recently and what they want to learn next. So what I mean by this is, and this is also from the Responsive Classroom, that our kids' days are so often jumbled and rushed that they don't have a chance to think about both what they've learned and what they would like to learn. So in the Responsive Classroom program, they ask kids at the end of the day to think of 3 things they've learned in the school day that they're going to take with them. This is a very powerful intervention because a lot of times we overestimate what the kids actually are taking away with them after they've been in our classrooms. And we think our classrooms are great, wonderful, and clear, but our kids' experience of these things could be very, very different. And of course, we never know that unless we take the trouble to actively ask them. So this is something that can happen the end of a day or at the beginning of a class, just to create the connection of one day to the next for our kids, and tells the kids that we value hearing about what they've genuinely learned from what we have instructed. Student legacy cards. We're heading toward the end of the academic, or at the end of the calendar year. So when the kids come back in January, a very interesting intervention is to give the kids index cards and ask them to imagine that it's June and the school year is over and the principal is going to stand up at an assembly and read the child's accomplishments to the class, to the school. Question is, what would you like to have said about you in June? What do you want your legacy for the rest of the school year to be? And it's fascinating to ask kids to do that. It's equally valuable to have them review it after every marking period. I mean, it's certainly great to do it at the beginning of the year, but now have them do it when they come back in January. Keep it, hold on to it, make reference to it, and hold the kids accountable to their own legacy. If you have a kid who's not able to articulate something positive that they would like to have said about them at the end of the year, that's a kid that's going to need a little extra counseling assistance, because that's a behavior problem waiting to happen, right? If you can't even articulate some positive sense of legacy for yourself. So again, what you're doing though is you're eliciting the students' own opinions and values, which makes them feel empowered and as if their voice matters. Cooperative rule setting. Here again, the beginning of the calendar year and the beginning of a marking period gives teachers excellent opportunities to revisit things. And so here I'm suggesting that give the kids an opportunity to co-create the rules of the classroom. They will value this, they will feel empowered by it, and again, you'll see that it has many, many benefits, including greater adherence. Finally, maybe not finally, but I've got a question for you to think about. There are a lot of bully prevention programs. We have assemblies, anti-bullying months in New Jersey. We have Week of Respect and all that. The question that I would like you to think about is, how would you keep the focus on the prevention of bullying, not only during bullying lessons, but at other points? So if we would like to make sure that kids understand the value of respect and the dangers of intimidation, how would you work it into these various other aspects of the school day? So what are some of your thoughts about that? How would you use social studies to highlight the value of respect and the dangers of intimidation? How would you use written expression? How would you use art to highlight the values of respect and the dangers of intimidation, or in any subject area? What are some of your thoughts about ways that this could happen in your schools? And we'll get some entries into the chat boxes that we can look at as we think a little bit about this. And certainly, when it comes to reading, just even understanding how authors communicate respect, what respect looks like in picture books, and also the same for intimidation, how people feel when they're intimidated. These are things that can be communicated very clearly. Read alouds that demonstrate the values of respect and the dangers of intimidation, right? Social studies, kids could study or research groups of people who are valued or intimidated. Absolutely. Again, this does not have to take you off of your syllabus and your curriculum, but it definitely can keep a focus on a very critical area. Art can be a visual reminder of respect. Indeed, wouldn't it be interesting to ask the kids to draw what they think what respect evokes in them, and similarly with intimidation, and having those things posted for kids to see. So these are important because bullying, intimidation, and the prevention of this and creating a school climate is a constant effort. And it's not just for some staff members to do. It's something that we want to keep a focus on in different areas. We'll come back to this a little bit more, but wonderful ideas. All right, let me move us along. Oh, there we go. Okay, here's another interesting thing that one can do at the beginning of a marking period. Ask kids what kinds of learning environments have been most and least successful for them in the past. So what you do is you take an index card. You don't have to have the kids put their name on it, but you simply ask them to write down, what is it about classrooms where you feel you have been able to learn the best? Write down 1, 2, 3 things about those classrooms. On the other side of the page, when you've been in classrooms where you haven't learned well, what have those been like? And if the teachers take that information and use it, they are going to find the classroom will become a transformed place, because kids are going to talk about how important it is for them to be listened to be cared about, that people show an interest in them. They're going to talk about how they react to being yelled at, how they react to when people don't make eye contact with them. It's incredibly instructive, and the kids feel heard. Similarly, and we'll talk more about this, but involve students in your anti-bullying efforts and make sure that every student understands that they have an obligation as an upstander, as does every adult. See, when we rely on bystanders to do something when bullying takes place, we are violating the definition of a bystander, right? What does the word bystander mean? It's pretty obvious. Somebody that stands by. So when a bystander is active, and we expect a bystander to be proactive, they're violating the basic tenets of being a bystander. And so it's so paradoxical that we're expecting bystanders to act. No, bystanders bystand. But what we are expecting is that everyone is going to be an upstander. If you've ever listened to James Comer talk about some of the work that he did in the New Haven Public Schools, he tells a story that has always stuck with me. He talks about the time when there was a kid new to one of their middle schools in New Haven, and he started to push and shove other kids, and he started to put up his fists like to have a fight, and nobody responded to him. And finally, another kid came over to him and said, "Hey man, we don't do this kind of thing here." And that's because everybody had absorbed the values of being an upstander. And so this is what we want our kids to understand, that it's everybody's responsibility to be involved, have a voice, and act to make the school the best place that it can be, not the responsibility of just a few people. All right. So let's talk about some other powerful strategies for fostering youth engagement. There are some best practices. Some of them may be familiar to you. We'll go through them and show a couple of examples. Number one, meaningful participatory student government. I'm not sure how many of your schools have student government, but in many schools that I work with, there are students who are elected, and they typically then don't engage the rest of the students. There isn't a real meaningful student government. We have a program in New Jersey that we're doing in middle schools called Mosaic. In Mosaic, every class elects, and there's a process for doing this, but every class elects 2 ambassadors. Those ambassadors have weekly, or at least periodic, conversations with their classmates about issues going on in the schools. They then communicate those conversations to the student council, to the student government, and or school administration. They then bring feedback from those groups and people back to their classroom. So there is an unbroken, if you will, chain from the individual student all the way up to youth leaders and school leaders. And that's what meaningful participatory student government is supposed to do. It's supposed to provide literally an opportunity and a bridge for everybody to get involved. It's not that difficult to do, and you'll always find some people in the school who are going to be very excited about giving kids that opportunity. Service learning, which is something that we are going to talk about in a moment, and I'm going to show you an example if we can make my video work. But before we go into the video, I actually want to skip ahead a little bit and talk a little bit about service learning, and then show you an example from Benjamin Franklin Middle School. So service learning is it's a type of pedagogy. It doesn't necessarily mean that kids go outside the school. It's an orientation that is maybe linked to experiential learning, but there is the element of service to it. And the data show clearly that when service learning is present in the school, even though it seems to take time away from instruction, it in fact is associated with improved attendance, school engagement, positive attitudes and motivation to school, and achievement. And so there is no shortage of studies showing that the time spent on service learning has excellent payoff on the academic bottom line. And that key elements of what makes service learning work include social and emotional skills, the opportunity to reflect, and this in turn gives the kids a greater sense of responsibility and caring for the school. So again, service learning has been associated with helping kids to be more trusted, positive bonds with adults, empathy, greater acceptance of diversity, attitudes toward others. So we're talking about something that, we're also seeing some examples in the chat box that we're pretty clear about, right? So the data are quite compelling. And I think that what we I want to go back and be able to show you an example of service learning. So let me go back and do that. So, okay, so I also want to just talk about the components of service learning. So service learning consists of basically these 6 steps, and this is the PARD model. It's well known in the service learning literature. So let's say, for example, that we are going to have a group of kids, and they're going to go and at holiday time, they're going to go to a senior center, and they're going to do something for the seniors. It is not service learning to take the kids, have them go to the senior center, sing a song, and come back. That is not a bad thing, but it is not service learning. Service learning would be, before they go, they do a little preparation. They read up about senior citizens, or they read up about senior citizen centers. They get some background information about it. Now, if you are teaching biology, you might focus on the biology of health among people who are aging. If you were focusing on history or English, other ways you can make the connection between what the kids were going to be looking at, and maybe things they've read or things they've heard about. Then there's the action. Okay, what are we going to do? We are going to engage in a song. But service learning is successful when the action involved has emotion risk to it. So basically what I mean is that if there's a chance that your kids are going to interact with these residents, that actually makes a service learning experience deeper and more genuine than if your kids are just sort of in an observational role. I'll give you another quick example. I work with a school that every year collected things from students and gave them to a school on the other side of town that was a poor school. The kids collected, and things were given to some teacher, and the teacher brought them over. That is, it's not a bad thing, but it's not service learning. It was transformed into service learning by a couple of steps. First of all, School A collected stuff to give to School B. School B created stuff, because they were a poor school, created stuff to give to School A. The kids in School A didn't just give it to a teacher to deliver. There was a delegation of kids from School A that met with the kids from School B to have this exchange and have dialogue and conversation. So the prospect of meeting these kids creates an emotional state in the kids from School A as well as School B. That emotional state heightens and deepens the learning experience that comes from the service process. It also creates a feeling of equality and dignity, i.e., I have something for you and you have something for me. They're not the same, but they are equal in their moral worth. And that's what we want kids to understand through service. So they take an action, then they come back and reflect on that action, which is very important. Then after that, demonstration means they share that experience with someone else. They could share it with parents at a parent-teacher meeting. They could share it with community members. They could share it with grade level that didn't participate. Then there's an evaluation. We ask how it went. We ask the people what they thought about it. And then at the end of the year, or sometime, there's an appropriate celebration of the fact that this took place. So when we looked and saw earlier the studies that showed effective service learning follows these different dimensions. Okay. Now comes the experiment, where I'm going to see if I can show a video that will illustrate a powerful service learning experience from Benjamin Franklin Middle School in Ridgewood, New Jersey.
Five, four, three, two, one. Audio on. Good morning, BF, and good morning, Ridgewood. I'm Sean, your host for today, December.
These 8th graders at Benjamin Franklin Middle School are about to air a news show that will be broadcast live to their entire school and the surrounding community of Ridgewood, New Jersey. It's an ambitious undertaking for any school, but at BF, it's just part of another day of social emotional learning.
Now let's go to an interview with Miss Haas, parent of Cassie Haas and Tobin Haas.
From a socially emotional learning point of view,
Maurice, we're not seeing the video.
that broadcast news class that demands.
Okay. Thought we were seeing it.
It looks like we had a freeze. Let's try restarting it.
We're hearing it, but we're not seeing it.
Okay. Tell me now.
Five, four,
Are you seeing it?
3, 2, 1. Audio on. Good morning, BF, and good morning, Ridgewood. I'm Sean, your host for today, December.
These 8th graders at Benjamin Franklin Middle School are about to air a news show that will be broadcast live to their entire school and the surrounding community of Ridgewood, New Jersey.
Five, four, three, two.
Okay, we're good
1.
now.
Good morning, BF, and good morning, Ridgewood. I'm Sean, your host for today, December.
These 8th graders at Benjamin Franklin Middle School are about to air a news show that will be broadcast live to their entire school and the surrounding community of Ridgewood, New Jersey. It's an ambitious undertaking for any school, but at BF, it's just part of another day of social emotional learning.
Now let's go to an interview with Miss Haas, parent of Cassie Haas and Tobin Haas.
From a socially emotional learning point of view, an environment is created in that broadcast news class that demands cooperation and self-esteem and self-worth, taking risks.
Annie rehearsals have been going on this week.
They learn about themselves. They learn about their strengths. They learn to help each other get through the show. They realize that everybody has a stake in this. I am so proud of what you all do in this school. I want you now to tell me what kind of school you think we have and should have, and what you're willing to do to make that school happen.
School principal Tony Bensavinga has solicited input from teachers, parents, and students in developing Ben Franklin's comprehensive social-emotional agenda. At this school, it's not simply part of the curriculum. It's a part of everything that happens here.
I've often talked to teachers and parents, and children to some degree, about the sense of relentlessly pursuing social emotional intelligence and relentlessly committing to developing a culture that is supportive and happy. And in order to do that, you need everybody on board.
Today, what we're going to do is discuss the book that we've been reading, Shadow of the Wall. We want to use it as a mirror to be able to look at ourselves through what happens in the book.
Every day, Ben Franklin students get a heavy dose of social-emotional learning, but they may not realize it since it's embedded in every class curriculum.
Let's talk about right here in this school. If you saw brutality going on, what could you do?
I guess in a way you can report them to like a higher authority, like the police or something.
We talked a little bit about foster care yesterday, and we kind of identified what foster care is. I just want you to try to put yourself in the position of a foster child.
From moving from place to place, like from school to school, it'd be hard to make friends. because you're always moving.
After the first or second home, it becomes difficult to get attached to someone because the child would know that he will have to leave eventually.
Like he said, you can never get used to someone, and then like because of that, you'd almost never trust anyone, so you'd become to yourself and you wouldn't express yourself anymore.
I mean, there are genocides here. Before we started doing this project, I never knew there were genocides.
Another key to the success of the social emotional learning effort here is teacher preparation.
And most of these kids won't know it either. I mean, most of them probably only have heard of the Holocaust.
Every teacher has 2 open periods each day to discuss problems and plan collaborative projects, like an interdisciplinary WebQuest project exploring genocide.
And I'm trying to get them to talk about their feelings, like how did this make you feel? And we've been talking.
At Ben Franklin, teachers agree that social emotional learning plays a vital role in the middle school experience.
I think when they're in the elementary school, they all feel like they're the same. And as soon as they get to middle school, this is where they start to notice differences. And then by the time they get to high school, it's almost too late because they've learned some of these behaviors and it's really tough to change them. Being able to get along with your peers is more important than anything they're going to learn in any one of our subjects. I don't care if it's learning how to do your multiplication tables, how to write, whatever it is. If you can't get along with each other, what good is that other stuff?
Digital technology plays a big role in social emotional learning here, from emails that keep parents in the loop to the video production class where students create their own public service announcements and broadcast them to the community.
No way. Why do people smoke pot? Some people smoke when they're under lots of stress, from school or out of school.
We hand it over to them and say, we trust you. You know, you could think of a million things that kids could say. You know, you could say, oh gosh, how can you put the kids out, let it go out to the community? We trust them. They know that.
Good, so a foster child might be having a lot of different feelings, anger and envy.
That's a powerful piece to have with kids. I mean, adults, teachers, and kids talking about faith and trust. And that's all part of this environment, you know, the tone that we set with them, which is we want to work with you. We have things we want to teach you and things we want you to learn, but we're here together cooperatively to do that.
Ben Franklin has won more than its share of awards for educational excellence, but Tony Benzavinga feels the rewards of BF's social emotional intelligence program are beyond measure.
So much of what we do in schools is focused on standards, focused on work products, and all of that is good. However, I believe that the social emotional component is clearly the most important part of a child's life.
That really puts down your self-esteem, and you shouldn't feel like that. And if you do, then you should get help, but not.
If we could create an environment where we feel good and care for each other, everything else falls into place.
Well, that's our show for today. I'm Sean for BFBM. Where are you? By the news. Have a great day.
Okay, back here. So Ben Franklin, the idea of "You Are the News" is a motto that became extremely powerful in that school. When kids were misbehaving in any way, they would go see a counselor or disciplinarian. The conversation would start with, "What kind of news do you want to be making?" So they made this very real. Every kid passed through this broadcast news class. One of the handouts that was associated with this was, with today's workshop, was a handout about the idea of BEST. The acronym BEST stands for body posture, eye contact, saying the right words and tone of voice. And literally every kid in the school was given communication skills training using this concept of learning how to be your best at communication, because every kid was going to go into that broadcast news class. And so if they were not prepared to be good communicators, that they were going to be let down. And again, the idea of this opportunity for kids is that they were literally creating a service to the community. It wasn't just something they were doing only for themselves. On the PowerPoint, the feedback sharing opportunities, you may remember that in the video, the kids were creating public service announcements, like why smoke pot? So imagine if kids, instead of just doing their academic assignments and handing them into the teacher, had to create products that were, in fact, service and sharing opportunities for others. So as part of this structure of the broadcast news class, kids would have to be transmitting health messages. So imagine what happens if you've got kids who are involved in bullying, who have to go on BFBN school network and be part of delivering an anti-bullying message. Imagine kids that are not taking such good care of their health, who are smokers, who have to go on TV and create anti-smoking messages to the community. Imagine what would happen if kids had to take some lesson that they got, a math lesson, a science lesson, and instead of just doing it in the classroom, actually had to broadcast it out to the community. These are feedback sharing opportunities that are service opportunities, but that youth find tremendously empowering and engaging and exciting, deepens their learning, causes them to want to become better socially and emotionally with each other. It's not the kind of thing that you have to do all the time. It's something that you could do once a marking period, even once, once in each half of the school year. But it's so powerful that the kids remember it tremendously. So that's how this whole thing kind of fits in. Students as researchers refers to literally having kids be involved in gathering data about the school. They can be involved in gathering incidents about accidents and mishaps in the school. They can be involved in collecting data about preferences that kids have about certain things. For example, we've had a lot of very interesting kid research on cafeteria food, where kids do surveys, and then this becomes part of math instruction to create a survey, compile the data, summarize the data, disaggregate the data, report the data, all very valuable and all very empowering for the kids. In fact, there's a wonderful Edutopia video called Cooperative Arithmetic that shows this kind of thing in action when students are taking the math class from the perspective of being a researcher and not just simply a student. A number of high schools have graffiti walls. Literally, they've got a wall that's set up, and it's obviously supervised, where kids can create graffiti that expresses some of their feelings. And again, these are things that can be kept up for a certain period of time. Then they can be put down, taken away. Many ways to think about doing this, but it gives kids opportunities for expression. Open forums for school problem solving. You heard on the video that Tony Bensavenga meets with his students in his middle school 4 times a year and asks them, in essence, what can you do to make this school better? But this can be even more focused. It can be, what can we do about making the school more inviting? What can we do about making it more welcoming? What can we do about making it more inclusive? What can we do about making it more of a welcoming place in the community? Whatever the school issue is, you can have an open forum for school problem solving, and the kids tremendously look forward to it. And when you first do it, the kids sit there, they're not used to being asked. They're not sure that the response is going to be taken seriously. So when someone is prepared to do this, they have to be prepared to do it for a while and not simply to just do it and say, oh, the kids didn't respond, I'm not going to do it. This is something where the kids have to be re-socialized into the fact that their voice and expressions actually matter. By the way, I'm noticing in the chat box, there's a little bit of a conversation about parents and the role of parents, and parents certainly can model bullying. We have maintained in our work with SEL and my work with SEL around the country and literally around the world, that it's very difficult to control the parents. But that being said, what's important is what we do in the school, and when we can't necessarily challenge the environment at home, but we can make it very clear to the kids that there are certain expectations that they have in school, and that's what's going to happen while they're in school. And when kids are in a positive, supportive environment, and they experience this over multiple years, this becomes the kind of environment they want to be in. And this turns out to be very helpful in them being successful in college, in relationships, etc. So while I certainly recognize that the role of the community and the parents can be very powerful and influential, the consistent messaging of the school about empowerment, caring, concern, voice, support, respect is just as meaningful to the kids in the long run. Okay, let me go on to another set of best practices. Okay, staff-student committee involvement. I alluded to this before. We have in our schools anti-gang committees, anti-bullying committees, anti-drug committees. We underutilize students in those committees. Either students should be on the committees, or they should have shadow committees that are focusing very much on the same problems and issues and giving feedback to the adults about things to do. Kids have different perspectives on these issues. Kids have extraordinary ideas, intuitions about them, and we need to tap them. Remember, there are relatively few bullies in the school. Kids hate bullying. There are relatively few drug-involved kids in the school. Kids hate drug involvement. Kids hate to be involved in gangs. When you give them the opportunity to be part of the solution, you'll see it can be transformative. In the UK, in some high schools, they have kids on hiring committees. And I think that's fascinating. The kids don't have a vote, but they have a voice. And I think that our high school students can often sniff out those teachers that are going to be clunkers, even when the adults may not think so. I actually implemented this at the university level. When I was involved in chairing our program, we had an opportunity where we could have selected 2 candidates. One of the candidates had a sterling resume. Another candidate did not have quite the formal credentials. Each of those 2 candidates met with our students, and we got feedback about the 2 candidates. The feedback from the students were that the more distinguished and honored candidate didn't really seem that interested in them, seemed more interested in talking about himself. The other candidate seemed very engaged and interested, and in fact, they realized that they didn't know a lot about him because he kept asking questions about them. So we went with students' intuition, not only for that reason, but it was a part of our decision-making. And over a number of years, we have felt rewarded and paid back many times by the presence of this other faculty member on our staff. So something to think about. Get your students more deeply involved in the important decisions of the school. Having a voice, diversity monitoring. So here's an interesting phenomenon. Many of us have preferences in our patterns of calling on people. We have preferences in how, when we're lecturing in a room, what direction we look in. So again, in the UK, they have kids who have clipboards, and the clipboard, they keep track of, did the teacher call on more boys or more girls? Did the teacher call on kids that represented the diversity of the classroom or not? Did the teacher tend to spend more of their time looking to the left or to the right? These are all tendencies, sometimes unconscious tendencies, that we have, And when someone monitors them and brings them to our attention and we become conscious of them, we can change them. So the kids are not being negative or pejorative. The kids are simply gathering data, using it for feedback, and different kids over time take turns having the clipboard and, in essence, doing a favor to the teacher by giving the teacher that feedback. Another strategy, buddies, mentors, and tutors across age and ability levels. I have a colleague, principal, who was Ray Pacey, who was the principal of two high schools. In each of those high schools, every 9th grader would have an 11th grade mentor. Every 10th grader would have a 12th grade mentor. And the kids could not wait to become 11th graders so they could start mentoring the 9th graders. And the same thing with being 12th graders so they could mentor the 10th graders. So imagine a school where every kid has an opportunity to be a mentor, a resource, and where every young kid in the school has a structured, positive relationship with an older kid. They did some workshops at the beginning of the year on how to be a mentor, how to communicate, et cetera, which is all very SEL skill building for the whole school. It can be transformative. But the point really is that in your school, every kid can be a resource to someone else. That your kid who's 2 years below reading level can read to a kid who's below his or her reading level. And that enables a kid to feel empowered, to have value. That their whole life in a school day is not about remediation of their problems, that at some point in the school day, they will get to serve others. And part of that is the PARD model. They just don't sit down and sit with a younger kid. They learn a little bit first about how do I read to a younger kid. They engage in that actual action, which has a certain tension to it, especially in the beginning. They reflect on how it went. What could they do better? They then could show one of their classmates how to do that tutoring. They could exchange tutoring tips. And then there's an evaluation of it, and then a celebration of the work. So the more we can have kids feel like they have value to the school, maybe they're not getting high proficiency on academics, but nevertheless, they walk into the school building and they have value. That's what they're looking for. That's what we want to do for them. Opportunities for reflection. We have discussed already a little bit, the opportunity for kids to reflect on what they've learned after a unit, after a marking period, getting their feedback about lessons in all of our social decision-making curricula and Mosaic curricula and all of our SEL-related interventions. Consistently embedded in that is getting feedback from the kids and the staff on what lessons went well, what did you like, what didn't you like, and finding ways of incorporating that feedback. So very, very critical to do. Next area I want to talk about, opportunities for identifying and developing one's laws of life and sense of purpose. So this is a powerful intervention. Let me skip the service learning stuff. Okay, so the laws of life and purpose essay projects were developed in Plainfield, New Jersey, and in the Urban Dreams Project and in the Mosaic Project in Jersey City. And the essence of this opportunity is really to give the kids a chance to identify their own life priority and value. So we ask the kids to think about, what is one rule that you believe is important to live by that gives your life meaning and purpose? And it's amazing how kids respond to this particular question. We also ask kids to think about, when you are at your best, how do you act? We also ask kids to think about, when do you feel best about what you do for others? And what is it that you're doing at that point in time? And finally, think of someone you admire most. How do they live their lives? So what we're trying to do is to get the kids to write about and think about and talk about these values. We want kids to have these conversations with themselves, with their classmates, and we actually want them to go home and have these conversations with members of their family. And we want the kids to then write about this, and as we'll talk about, not only write about it, but also do more than just write about it, but enact it through multiple modalities. But this becomes, in many schools, just part of their language arts curriculum, because the kids have all kinds of writing things they have to learn, forms of essay writing. But what gets transformed is what happens when they actually use this as a focus for having to write. Here's another example of a prompt that we use to get the kids to think about their sense of purpose. So that's a related topic. One is your laws of life, one is your sense of purpose. Write about a personal experience where you feel that something you did made a difference. Describe how these experiences help give you a sense of purpose and how you continue working toward your sense of purpose. So what we're trying to do here is get our kids to begin to articulate their moral compass. We want them to talk about, think about the laws by which they want to live their life, and we want to get them to think about their sense of purpose. But there is a book, Urban Dreams, that contains essays from kids that in grades 5, 8, and 11 that wrote essays. I have an essay here from a kid who wrote a purpose essay in middle school that followed the essay format that they were using in language arts instruction in 8th grade in his school. And I just want to read it to you quickly so you have a sense of what we're talking about when we give kids these opportunities. Everyone has a purpose in life. Believe it or not, we were all put on this world to do great things. Now, I will preface this by saying this is a priority school, a low-income, minority enrollment school, disadvantaged, where the kids have been written off a dozen times. Right? Listen to what's in these kids. Everyone has a purpose in life. Believe it or not, we were all put on this earth to do great things. The definition of purpose is the reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists. There are people with strong purposes in my life. For example, my older sister. Her purpose in life is to look after my nephew who has cerebral palsy and maintain her happiness. Although I might be young, I definitely know what my purpose in life is. My purpose is something that's going to make me happy and helps me feel like I deserve to be here. Having a purpose, no matter what it is, should be special to you and make you feel happy. I completely know how it feels to wonder and not be sure what your purpose is or why you're here. It can be hard, but once you find it, it's the best feeling ever. Music is a really big part of my life, so I've decided my purpose is to create music for others. I want to inspire others and encourage others to believe in themselves. I also want to save people by music. Music has saved me from tough times, so I want to do the same for others. I also really love writing poetry, so that can be included in my lyrics. People can know that music and inspiring music is my purpose because I love music and making others happy. I'm always listening to music. People can see me listening to music, and it's something I can't live without. I play the guitar and I sing. Another way that people will know my purpose is that I hate seeing people that I love being sad. I'm always the one that people turn to because I'm an understanding person. I love cheering up others and seeing people be happy, often through music. In conclusion, I feel strongly about my purpose and believe that'll happen someday. It makes me so happy and proud of myself when I do things that inspire my purpose even more. Having a purpose helps me stay positive through times when I feel I don't belong. It also makes me strong and that I could do anything I put my mind to. That's one example of what happens when kids get an opportunity to talk about their sense of purpose. That essay was written with the collaboration and cooperation of classmates giving feedback, teacher giving instruction, and as you heard, kids going home and talking to their relatives about it and bringing their perspectives in. When the school becomes a place that honors individual kids' sense of purpose, they feel a deep sense of engagement. Similarly with the laws of life. When kids are able to both talk about and share their sense of purpose and laws of life, it becomes an extremely powerful learning environment for them. Right? All right, so you can take another step in this that is very important, particularly for your tier 1, for your tier 2 and tier 3 kids. Because remember, we can't get kids to strictly deal with behavior management if we are not giving them that sense of inspiration. Inspiration precedes remediation. So we have to acknowledge that no matter how miserable a kid may be behaving, they too have a positive law of life in there somewhere. They too have a positive sense of purpose. So we give the kids the opportunity to articulate it, and then we provide a structure that allows our kids to learn how to live by a set of guiding values through values-linked goal-setting contracts. So these two things can take a couple of different forms. Here's one form. Ask the kids to set 3 goals. What are 3 ways I'm going to make myself better? What are 3 ways I'm going to make my classroom better? What are 3 ways I'm going to make my school better? What are 3 ways I'm going to make the wider community and world better? And when you've got kids that are behavior problems, and you're asking them to do this, you're broadening their lens, because you are saying to them, yes, you have a behavior problem, but I believe you have the capacity to make this school a better school. And I believe you have the capacity to make the community and the world a better place. I have not given up on you. You cannot give up on you. Now, it may take a while for the kids to formulate this. Kids can do this in a group and help each other, talk about goals and things like that. Very powerful. But I mean, these things can be revisited just the way the legacy cards can be revisited. But this gives the kids a very strong message about the fact that we expect them to be contributors and that we believe their voice matters. Here's another example, and that is to set up contracts. And so what you can see here is an example of a law of life contract. Basically, kids can articulate whatever their law of life might be. For some kids, it's respect. For some kids, it's leadership. For some kids, it's love. For some kids, it's family. Then it says, over the next few months, here's what I'm going to do to live out my laws of life. In other words, if my law of life is service, and I eventually want to be a doctor, well, I'm not going to be a doctor immediately. Maybe my first goal is going to be to pass biology, right? So then it says, in order to achieve the goal, here's what I'm going to do. And then it asks the kids to anticipate obstacles. What are problems that I might face? And if I do encounter those obstacles, how am I going to handle it? And there can be another sheet for a second goal. This can be a group activity where kids are given input and conversation about what obstacles might come their way, whether their plan is realistic, etc. The most critical element in this is the 3rd bullet point, which says include a buddy for mutual accountability and responsibility. So at the end of the contract, it's signed by the kid and it's co-signed by someone who is going to share responsibility for helping the kid live up to his or her laws of life. You can make these contracts mutual so that I sign for you and you sign for me, or you can make it a round robin. I sign for you, you sign for me, I sign for you, you sign for someone else signs for someone else signs for me. But the idea is that everybody in a given classroom or even a given clinical group is involved in having a contract and reinforcing a contract. This is a a very, very powerful modality that we've seen work and be transformative for many kids, right? By writing down goals, it makes it easier to remember. By putting the steps down, it allows there also to be cues and reminders so that kids can stay on track more easily. Anticipating and planning for obstacles increases the likelihood for perseverance, because if you're prepared for an obstacle, you're more likely to persist than if the obstacle comes and you absolutely were not prepared. And then finally, having a buddy increases generalization and follow through, right? So this is, again, a very, very powerful kind of strategy. And, in a couple of minutes that we have left, I want to show you a couple of other examples of what happens and how this can be done not only through essay writing and writing, but in other ways. So here is a slide, I hope. Okay. Oh, hold on a second. These are files that were so big I literally couldn't send them. But here. So kids were asked to not only, instead of writing their laws of life, they were asked to create an artistic depiction of their laws of life. So a bunch of kids in a school in Israel created this about leadership and the importance of leadership. So here is something about the people and the leader, right? So here are the people and they see the leader, right? Here's the next slide. If you turn the display around, when the leader looks at the people, all the leader sees is himself or herself. The kids were sending a message about how important it is for the leader to be seen by the people and to see the people, and that when leadership fails, it's because the leaders look at the people but only see themselves. Now, in a million years, I couldn't create something like that, but it was so powerful and fantastic. And all the kids in this situation, there were Israeli kids and Arab kids, all the kids had different opportunities to do this. Here's another one, where kids didn't simply talk about their law of life, they created drawings and diagrams that represented their laws of life. So here's someone who had an idea about being an entertainer. You can see on the very bottom of the slide, there's a sort of like a dollar bill and a kid with dollar bills. So this kid's law of life was about the importance of being responsible with your money. And you can't see the full thing here, but he created this image, this depiction, which he had on his t-shirt, of people being just foolishly throwing away their money and how they shouldn't do that. Here's another one. These are two of the most powerful things I've ever seen. So in the floor,
You're breaking up a little bit.
Sound-wise?
You're breaking up. We got a lot of static from you.
Okay.
Okay, much better, much better.
Okay. So in the foreground, you see the picture of the man with a big mustache. So if you notice, the mustache is covering the mouth of the woman. The law of life of these kids was that women should be empowered to be able to speak. And this diagram was their depiction of that law of life. Now, what is so extraordinary about this is that in the Arab school system, virtually all of their teachers were men. And so that the men who were the teachers gave them the opportunity to do this was really, really quite extraordinary. To the left of that, you'll see an open like notebook. This was a graphic novel that another girl wrote about how she was tempted to commit suicide because of the fact that she was ignored in her household and how she felt so isolated, alone, and just hopeless, and how she came to get past all that and begin to see her own value. You know, when kids are harboring some of these difficulties and they don't have the opportunity to let them out, it is no wonder that they're going to be interfering with their learning in many substantial ways. The last thing I want to call to your attention is one of the handouts, which is an outline for the Video Critique Club. I want to suggest to you that in your work with kids with difficulty, we want to try to transform the experience of behavior change into something positive. So when we have kids who have anger management problems, stress, etc., instead of putting them into remediation groups, we create something called the Video Critique Club. In the Video Critique Club, again, it's a handout that you have access to. The Video Critique Club gives the kids the opportunity to watch a video about the problem situation they're dealing with, whether it's anger or bullying or addiction or whatever. And then it takes them through a process of creating their own version of that video, that they become like video critiquers and then video creators. In doing that, you get the kids to deal with all of the skill building that you would do in a remediation therapeutic context, except you do it in a positive context. And that's really the message of the entire approach. We're trying to create a positive environment for the kids in the school where they feel recognized, where they feel appreciated, where they feel as if they are valued, and where they feel like they have a true voice because they're in a safe place that really cares to hear what they have to say. We might have a couple of moments if there are a couple of questions that you might want to pose. We're happy to take a look. And there's one other quick thing that I will share with you before we close out. So, an anthropologist proposed a game to the kids in an African tribe. He put a basket full of fruit near a tree and told them that whoever got there first would win the sweet fruits. When he gave them the signal to run, they all took each other's hands and ran together. Then they sat in a circle, just like what you're seeing, enjoying their treats. When he asked them why they chose to run as a group when they could have had more fruit individually, one child spoke up and said, "Ubuntu. How can one of us be happy if all the other ones are sad?" Ubuntu in the Xhosa culture means I am because we are. I think that they're onto something in that culture. They're onto the fact that our kids really want to be together, work together, be valued together, that they're not inherently trying to compete and undercut with one another. And even if we can't change necessarily immediately the academic testing structure that does seem to pit the kids against one another, we can create alternative structures in our schools where all our kids feel like valued participants in Tier 1, in Tier 2, and in Tier 3. So I thank you very much for this evening.
Maurice, thanks so much for a thought-provoking session. We have lots to think about and apply prior to our next session in January. So, and those of us on taking the webinar for credit, lots more discussion time that we can take upon these ideas and expand and find out what folks across the state of Alaska are already doing and how we can add to what we are doing to be more just engaged in the whole process. Oh, we did have a question. Can we see the, now I know the video recording Melissa said on her end came through really well, but some folks had it a bit jumpy or delayed in the talking. We're wondering, can we see these on the website that you've got there? And can we also see the the video on cooperative math?
Yes, the cooperative math video is definitely on Edutopia. So if you go to edutopia.org, you should definitely be able to see it there. The BFBN video about the broadcast news class, that, you know, it comes and goes on Edutopia, but I'm going to see about putting it on my website, secdlab.org. So let me get back to you about that, and then you can inform people about that.
And we will. Thanks so much for doing that. And also, if the recording shows it in a better format, that might be just enough for folks. They can go into the recording of tonight's webinar and see it there too.
Yeah, well, you'll be able to check on that actually, I guess, and let us know.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and I thank you for sharing how to make those service learning projects more meaningful. Just by a few tweaks here and there, you can really amp up the results. So, great, great.
Best holiday wishes, everybody, and we will reconvene in the new year.
Yes, we don't meet again until January 22nd. And before everybody else signs off, remember, would you take a look at the link for the survey so that we can have you, it's posted there in the chat box. Click on that link and you can give us feedback as to what else you need, where we're going, and Maurice will get to see what you're saying, as well as the staff at ASDN. So we certainly do appreciate that. It just takes a couple of minutes. If you're there with a team, fill it out together. That's just wonderful. The URLs posted are in the chat box rather than on the screen. They won't work on the screen. And those of you taking the webinar for credit, remember there are discussion options posted after each webinar, and be sure to, you get the choice of responding to one of the options, but then also go and read other comments and post a comment to that. So there are two parts to each discussion that you need to complete to get full credit for that. And if you've got any questions, you can always, there's my email, dianakirk@gci.net. You can email me and I will get back with you directly. Class for credit, Allison, will there be any grading anytime soon? What I've done, everyone should have received that's taking the webinar for credit. You have received an assignment update. And it came, if it didn't come through to you, please get back to me, because I've sent exactly where you are to everyone right prior to, about mid towards the end of November. You should have received it. Okay, Allison, send me an email, dianakirk@gci.net, and I will get back to you with that as soon as I can. And if there's any other questions, we'll leave the chat box open for a short amount of time, give you time to click on the survey link, and then also just email me if you've got something personal that you need to do. Thanks, Nancy. I know Maurice will appreciate that.